when Jerry asked me if I could do one of the talks, and we went and looked at the words, and the word pattern came up, I thought that totally fits like what I do and what we do at Community Design Fort Worth, and some of the things that are super important to me in regards to city planning and the areas that I've served in over the years, so it fit really well. It also reminded me of the fact that there's this book called A Pattern Language, which I'm going to share with you, honestly has been sitting on my bedside table for like probably longer than my oldest child has been alive, which is 26 years. That may be a little bit of an exaggeration. I have skimmed this book, but look at it, it's very thick. And I have not read it in totality, but it is kind of one of the, Bibles of city planning. And so that was another reason why I felt this very much fit. And then I'm gonna have to remember where to point these things. This slide shows Community Design Fort Worth, which is what I'm doing currently. And we are a place for big ideas. And when I was putting these slides together, the font on big ideas was a little bit smaller than that. And my husband said, I think that font needs to be a little bit bigger if you're talking about big ideas. So the purpose of design centers is kind of described on this slide, and sorry, the font might be a little bit smaller on this one, but it's a place or an organization providing community focus, design education, and services. They generate design solutions for underserved communities specifically. That is something that we focus on very much at Community Design Fort Worth. And potential clients include nonprofits, governments, and the private sector, and it's a place to test ideas. To see how they work and how those things might help generate future projects for professionals. So Community Design Fort Worth itself, I am often approached by folks asking if we will do a project for someone. And one of the things that's in our bylaws is that we are made up of a board of design professionals that do these things for a living. And we also work alongside faculty at UTA and students, and so some of the projects that we work on involve those folks doing those things. And so we're not here to take work away from other folks. So we don't do actual projects that could be done by design professionals where they get paid. But design centers are located throughout a lot of American cities, and our mission specifically at Community Design Fort Worth is to enhance the quality of life in Fort Worth communities, serving as a resource for community assistance, engaging the public in dialogue about key issues and opportunities, and undertaking long-term visioning. So at the time that Community Design Fort Worth was created in early 2016, I was serving on the city council, and so I was not necessarily involved at an intimate level with Community Design Fort Worth, but it was started by a group of design professionals that I was aware of and knew really, really well. And one of the projects that I'll talk about during this presentation, I was instrumental in helping get funding for. So they came up with a concept and brought it to the city, and then I was instrumental in making sure that it got onto a bond so that it got funded, and you'll recognize it when I share with you what it is. It's important to also identify that we've got some really important funding partners that have supported the work of Community Design Fort Worth. The group of people that came together to start the organization did so because they saw a bit of a gap kind of in what the city was able to do as far as meeting the community, explaining planning type issues, talking to community members about the things in their community that are important, the patterns of their community that are important to them to attack the struggles that they face on a daily basis. So these organizations have been supportive of this effort since the very beginning, and we've continued to partner with all of these organizations, both with funding and with their support of their expertise, their professional expertise. We have a very close relationship with AIA Fort Worth, which is the membership organization for architects, and we do design talks in concert with them. But we also, and this list is growing, so some of the partnerships that I have been able to curate over the last few years don't appear formally on this community partnership list, but we've started to branch out, and this year specifically trying to branch out into communities that have been underserved or are facing kind of development pressures that could jeopardize the community being able to have a say in how the patterns of that development impacts them and impacts their ability to stay in their neighborhoods. Design centers, like I said, exist around the nation. Ours was specifically patterned after the Nashville Design Center, and that is because the chair of our organization, Randy Hutchison, who has been the liaison between our organization and the city for many, many years because of his, he worked for the city of Fort Worth for 20 years, but he came from Nashville. And he brought the idea of a design center that patterned after Nashville to Fort Worth. And when I went and researched what they'd done in Nashville, Nashville's Design Center grew out of a very significant concern that a group of individuals had about a road project that was proposed in Nashville to basically serve a sports venue. And it was basically a big wide road plowing through the center of their downtown to take people in and out of that event venue. And it wasn't for the people in that community. It was just to get people in and out at a rapid pace. And it would have been very disruptive to the patterns of that community. So that group came together and fought that battle, and then hung together and continued to do work. And one of the people that was involved ended up running for and becoming successfully the mayor of Nashville. So I looked back and was a little bit regretful that the city of Fort Worth had a similar battle when TxDOT planned to expand I-30 in the location that it was prior to where it is now. And some of you in this room are old enough to remember when I-30 was on top of Lancaster Avenue in downtown. And it was an elevated highway that cut off the TNP warehouse and the post office from the rest of downtown, disrupting the pattern and the fabric of that edge of downtown. And a group of people came together to convince TxDOT through a lawsuit to move that highway. And they were successful in that. And so my regret was maybe if they had hung together the way the group in Nashville had hung together, we would have 20 years of history for a design center in Fort Worth, but we don't. And so I decided to look at the positive side of it in that this design center came together because people saw a gap and a lacking, but not because of some big battle where we were fighting some governmental organization. So I look at it as we came together in a very positive way. So getting to the pattern part of today's discussion and what brought me to Christopher Alexander's pattern language and made me realize that that was going to be a really significant fit for what we do and the work that we do as planners. This book, if you don't want to read it, we're just going to talk briefly about the fact that it has 253 different pattern forms of language, and these patterns can be used to inform a project. And that project can be like how you set up a room, just like how you design a room and how it functions for you, or how you build a building, or how you look at a neighborhood, or how you look at an entire city. So what is the pattern language of Fort Worth? I would hope that we would not want it to be what is depicted in this picture. And part of the work that we do at Community Design Fort Worth is having input and say in what government and other governmental organizations are trying to do in our communities. This quote is from the book, and I'm going to end at the end of the talk with another quote that says this a little bit more succinctly. But shown here, towns and buildings will not be able to become alive unless they are made by all of the people in society, and unless those people share a common pattern language within which these buildings, and unless the common pattern language is alive itself. So I think that speaks to things being able to evolve and change, and input from a variety of communities and a diverse community, all people being able to come together and be heard. I often share with folks that what has influenced my life and the decisions I've made about the way that I serve in my community is the upbringing that I had, where I was raised at a Quaker boarding school in Northern California. My parents were on the faculty there. And if you're not familiar with the way that Quakers come to decision making, they use a process called consensus. And it's not a matter of everybody coming together and voting and whoever has the most votes wins and everybody else is just, left by the wayside. Coming to consensus is hammering through, talking through, getting input from everyone until everyone is comfortable with the decision that is made that they're going to move forward with. And it sounds really lovely. And I feel like it's informed a lot of my service on the council and all the different things that I've done in my life and building of community, which is something that's been really important and influential to me throughout all of the work that I've done. But it's also really excruciating. And sometimes you just want to give up and throw up your hands because it's a lot of work. But it's really important work. And it's why I'm really grateful that I still have the ability to work in that arena through the work that Community Design Fort Worth does. So, what were the drivers of the pattern language in Fort Worth and in North Texas? And in looking back through our history, access and a rivalry are two things that have really influenced the pattern language in our city. The Fort Worth pattern language was driven by this access and rivalry because there was a pattern of development that was largely driven by the need for access to the nation and a rivalry that we have with the city of Dallas. Connection by air and road and rail significantly influenced the pattern language in Fort Worth. And I got really into, Randy was very helpful with putting together this presentation, and he gave me a ton of notes like for all of these slides. And when I was trying to kind of absorb them all into my brain, I was finding that that was really quite impossible. So if you're interested in more of the details of the history of all of these stories that I'm about to share, I'm happy to share that, but I'm probably not going to go into the nitty-gritty of all those details. But in 1875, way back, I was not here, we had no navigable rivers, we had no rail, and we had a limited population going to our west, and we had Dallas to our east. The Texas and Pacific Railroad extension, before the extension, Fort Worth's population was dropping, and it was down to like 600. But the remaining civic leaders cut a deal to build the railroad bed if the railroad would then lay the tracks. And, I've heard this story from historians in Fort Worth over and over again about people were out there, they had to meet a deadline or this wasn't going to happen. And they came together and they did that. And if you don't recognize this building, it's because this is not the current TNP building. This is a building that was lost to fire at the location where the current TNP building is located. I'm going to have to put my glasses on to make sure there wasn't a little bit in my notes that, I wanted to share with you that was the original. But, and also that there's a great resource for history in Fort Worth when it comes to buildings. John Roberts has a website called Fort Worth Architecture, and it also has a forum as well. And anytime anybody asks a question about Fort Worth buildings and the history of any buildings in Fort Worth, I can almost always go find a building on that website and share with people where that history of that building was located. So I think I pushed a button that I didn't mean to push, but that's fine because we are ready to move on to this slide. So increased rail connectivity changed the pattern of Fort Worth. Before, we were just kind of a stop on the Chisholm Trail, literally where cows were herded, not the highway that we have now called the Chisholm Trail Parkway. But before that, that's all that we had was this stop for cattle on the Chisholm Trail. But with rail, Fort Worth stockyards were developed, and the detailed research and information and history that I was not going to end up reading to you, because when I started going through some of this material last night with my husband, he's like, you are going to lose them if you start reading all of this stuff. But it is incredibly interesting, the amount of, the money that went into building the first Spanish-style exchange building, the number of animals that have gone through that stockyard, the commerce that was built there. And it was like one of the largest stockyards, I think, in the world. And then the whole story about Nile City and the annexation and all of that. So that definitely influenced the pattern of the city of Fort Worth and how it has grown. We have also been influenced by roads and interstates. So in the 1920s, from 1911 through the 1920s, major gas was discovered occurring to the west of Fort Worth. And by the 20s, Fort Worth was becoming increasingly connected to the hinterlands, which we still have some hinterlands. But when you look at some of our patterns of development these days, we have followed kind of a pattern of sprawl, which is not necessarily the best pattern when you're looking at things from the perspective of city planning. But we had all that area to build out into. And when you compare Fort Worth to some other cities that have some things that kind of hem in development and make it so that you can't just continue to sprawl out into the hinterlands, they have a little bit more compact development and are not as influenced by that pattern of sprawl. But Fort Worth became the economic hub of West Texas. It had oil and gas and farming interests, and the accumulation of wealth drove civic ideas like Will Rogers Complex and the stock show and the Texas Frontier Centennial. But all of those things require, beyond just, having them and providing the connections to them, once you have those connections and are on the civic stage, you need to promote those things. So we ended up moving into the next phase, which I'm going to talk about, which is another pattern that has influenced how Fort Worth has developed, and that is aviation. And not as many people are familiar with the aviation history of Fort Worth. But Fort Worth's first airport, Meacham, in February of 1926, was the first airline passenger to ever fly out of Texas on a scheduled airline departing from Meacham and flying to Oklahoma. This was operating from July of 2025, and originally it was only on 100 acres. And in the early days, the facility saw aircraft operating on runways that were composed of dirt and sod. And the young airport was founded by a former mayor of Fort Worth, Henry Meacham, which it was then renamed after in 1927. And he pledged $1,200 of his own money to build a caretaker's cottage at the airport. So these are all the history of Fort Worth's airport. And we also have Fort Worth's Carswell, which a lot of people still call Carswell. But this is the original. It originally opened in 1932 at the Tarrant Aerodrome, and the airport eventually became Naval Air Station Joint Reserve Base of Fort Worth. And the facility was responsible for a new pattern language in the development of Fort Worth, which is the military industrial complex. So aviation and military have also influenced the patterns of how our city has grown. And this is another slide that I have a huge amount of history on that I'm not going to read to you. But again, we'll share that material with any of you that you want to go into more detail. It actually is 2 pages of slides. But the military pattern language included Lockheed Martin, Bell Helicopter, and other military industrial employment brought employees from around the nation and the world, which influenced the pattern of Fort Worth because it brought people from other parts of the nation with new ideas to Fort Worth, and they had different ideas on architecture and planning. I moved to Fort Worth. Transparency, I'm not from here. And I've been told that you're not a Texan unless you were born on Texas soil. I gave birth to Texans, but I am not a Texan myself because I was not born here. And when I moved here, there was very much kind of a feeling of talking to people and getting information from people who are from here. And I think that we are now entering a new pattern where we're opening up our minds a little bit to being open to the ideas of what people from somewhere else might think is a good idea to do. And I think that's a good thing. And it seems like this is a cycle that we've gone through. So it's not just new to us right now. In addition, we had the Greater Southwest International Airport. And this airport was basically competing with Love Field, and it was losing mightily. And I think the federal aviation folks said, we're not going to fund 2 airports. And so this is where the idea of having a combined DFW airport came into being. And Dallas had all the people going to Love Field, so they had a lot to lose. And Fort Worth didn't have anything to lose because our airport was having less traffic. And so that was a really good deal for Fort Worth. Had that not happened, I think we would have a very different future and a current existence. But this airport was connected us to more places in the nation and the world and brought more people together. But in 1974, the Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport opened. It was directly north of the previous airport that the city of Fort Worth had. And the location of this airport pulled more development to the northwest of Dallas and the northeast of Fort Worth, again, affecting the pattern of how we have developed. We also have Perot Field in Fort Worth, Alliance Airport, which was the first industrial airport. And so we don't have navigable waters and a port and things that some other cities have to affect our pattern of development. But we do have this airport, which I will tell you, the bone I have to pick with Alliance is that they call themselves Alliance, and it makes people think they're not part of Fort Worth. And that annoys me. So I always take the opportunity to share with folks that Alliance is in Fort Worth and it's not Alliance, Texas. But it definitely has impacted the pattern that we have of development with everything that's developed to the north of Fort Worth. And I think that pattern has also influenced people who live in that area that sometimes don't even realize that they're part of Fort Worth. I mean, it's not helped by the fact that we call them Alliance, or they call themselves Alliance. But when you're as big and spread out and sprawly as Fort Worth is, and you have that pattern, there's people who just have no connection to your core. And I'm ad-libbing a little bit here, but in the past, the city of Fort Worth, with the way that they've done council districts, have tried to maintain every council district having a connection to the core in order to have them feel that that's important and want to represent what is good for the core. I think what is good for the core is good for the entire city, even if you don't have physical constituents that live in those areas. And in the last go round of redistricting, they kind of gave up on that idea because people who were in the little piece that came down to the core were getting neglected by the interests of the people who were in the more far-flung areas. So I think that was an attempt to have a little bit better representation. But again, it's a pattern that we have to contend with now because it was allowed to happen that way. So we're now up to current times. Sorry it took so long to get here. And we still are being influenced by patterns of transportation. And at the current time, we're looking at commuter and high-speed rail. And I know most of you, if you know me, know that I'm very passionate about the idea of having a multimodal transportation system that allows people to get around a community and around a region without always having to get into a single occupancy vehicle. We are growing like gangbusters, and more people are coming here. And I think that finally the traffic engineers are wrapping their brains around the fact that you cannot widen roadways to fix congestion, because there's something called induced demand. And when you widen the road, just more people drive, and those lanes get filled back up before they are barely even open. So it is really important that we start looking at other ways to travel in our community, and that these choices that we're making today will have a strong influence on the pattern of our development going forward. Fort Worth is becoming more connected to the region through our commuter rail. Now that we have the train that goes to the airport, that is going to have an extension that goes into the medical district, and then, fingers crossed, goes down further so that it's near TCU, which will allow me to get on the train without even having to get in any other kind of vehicle to get to the train station. And then we are also looking at the future of high-speed rail, which would connect Fort Worth to other parts of the nation and even all the way down into Mexico. I served on the Regional Transportation Commission while I was on City Council, and we've been talking about this high-speed rail for some time. I don't know how many of you are reading local news, but you might have heard that Dallas passed some kind of nonsense resolution, that's my own personal opinion, about that would possibly jeopardize the one-seat ride for Fort Worth. So we've been very strongly looking at the connection between Dallas and Fort Worth, which would allow a one-seat ride for Fort Worth to go from Fort Worth to Dallas and then all the way to Houston. And if Dallas doesn't agree to have the station where it's currently located, that could jeopardize the one-seat ride. We would still have a connection, but we would have to get off of one train and get on another train. And then I saw the mayor, Maddie Parker, wrote a letter in support of this connection and the understanding of the importance of this triangle and connecting this triangle through high-speed rail. As someone who takes the Vaughn Lane regularly to Austin and Houston, it takes exactly the amount of time to take the bus as it does to drive, and you don't have to do the driving. But can you imagine getting to Houston in 90 minutes? Yeah, it would be fantastic. And so this is something that I hope others are supportive of. I think the people who are not supportive of it have some loud voices. So wherever I go, I try to encourage folks to support a multimodal network. And, that even goes back to what we do here in the city of Fort Worth with our local transit system. Trinity Metro is out doing public meetings right now, and I've encouraged a few people to go to them. And one of my friends that I sent to the one up in Riverside texted me while she was there and said, "This is so much fun." So last night I went to one of their public meetings and they said, "Oh, a friend of yours was here." I said, "Yes, she was very excited. It was so much fun." So transportation has established our macro pattern. So what's next? And getting back to what's important to Community Design Fort Worth and what should be important to all of you is cities the equitable and inclusiveness of the work that we're doing. Because just because a transit service is not something that maybe you need because you have a car and you're, free to move about, but you're not going to be so free to move about as the roads fill up with other cars. That doesn't mean it's not beneficial to you. If you look at the folks that don't drive and need those kind of services, they range from the young who can't drive because they're not old enough, the old who shouldn't be driving because we need to move on to other things. And believe me, I'll be ready to do that when the time comes. And then people who just have mobility issues that can't drive, visual, whatever the case may be. So there's a whole group of people. And as some of my colleagues have shared, just because you're not going to use it yourself doesn't mean that it doesn't benefit you. Because if we have these other modes, then it lessens the congestion. And if you choose to drive your car, you'll be able to do that more freely. But it's really important that, and this is the quote I referenced at the beginning where I said that the pattern book had a very long kind of quote. But the quote that I live by and have as a city planner for many, many years is this quote from Jane Jacobs, that cities have the capability of providing something for everybody only because and only when they are created by everybody. And so this is kind of a call to action. And someone might recognize themselves in this photo here. But transportation has established our macro pattern again. And again, what is next? Increased citizen participation in government. And I think finally the city is realizing that just having a public meeting and making people come to them is not necessarily the best way of engaging. And it's especially not the best way of engaging underserved communities, Black and brown communities, and, just different communities that have not had that access in the past, maybe don't feel comfortable coming to those kind of meetings. And they've started going out and doing events and bringing information to people in places that they're already gathered. So each year there are important meetings that are taking place across our community, and they are informing and establishing the policies that guide what our future is going to look like. And literally less than 1% of our community is deciding our future because we do not have very good turnout at some of these meetings. Now, this meeting had very good turnout. And my thought, this was the city summit to talk about the comprehensive plan that the city has underway. And this table in the front, I think, is a lot of Riverside folks, which Riverside had to fight really hard because they lived in an area where 3 council districts came together. When I was serving on city council for District 9, those 3 council districts came together. And you might think it would be good to have 3 council members serving you. It is not, because they all just point and nobody takes ownership. So they fought really hard to be included into one council district and were successful at that. And now hopefully they're getting good representation from their District 11 council member. So going back to what Community Design Fort Worth does, we are working with lots of different coalitions on lots of different things that are important. And one of the reasons I wanted to talk to everybody here is to encourage people to find an area that is important and that they're passionate about to lend their voice. We are working with a new housing coalition, which is a group of folks that understand the importance of the housing crisis and the affordability crisis that we face in Fort Worth and across the country, to encourage the city to do more things and put more tools in place to provide affordable housing. We have a coalition, like I said, with the architects and with the landscape architects, and we're working together with partners in education to do outreach. We also have started we do design talks, but we create content and we work with all these different communities. And one of the ones that we've been doing lately has been Northside, because the patterns that are occurring in Northside are really important to be including the voices of Northside. Panther Island on one side, the Stockyards on the other. There's a large community in the middle that risks being displaced and the negative impacts of gentrification as improvements are coming. And we don't want people to be opposed to improvements in their community because they fear that they're not going to be part of the future that those improvements will be a part of. So we continue to do that work. And some of these things that are on here are, we have an upcoming study that the city is doing with ULI, which is Urban Land Institute, to take a look at Northside and the cultural assets that exist in Northside so that the pattern of the future can maintain the things that are important to that community while also improving and having the new things that are coming as well. So These are referencing things that are on our website where we host conversations to elevate ideas, to generate discussion, to encourage conversations, to enlarge the tent for more ideas, and to encourage participation. Because the growth of our future is imperative that it have all of our voices to be included in that. So some of the big ideas that we have had some of these talks on have been back to TxDOT and highways, where I was discussing before the impact that we had on being able to move a highway through a lawsuit. Hopefully we don't have to go that route anymore, but sometimes there's lawsuits going on right now about highway expansion in various communities in Texas. I-30 is looking to, TxDOT is looking to do some improvements, and I'll put that in quotes, on I-30 because some of the things that are driving that is people who drive in from the west and they're just wanting to get through a place as quickly as possible. So we don't want future highway construction improvements, whatever, to further damage neighborhoods. Highways have damaged neighborhoods, and now people are identifying ways to kind of stitch those neighborhoods back together. So one of the concepts that we suggested to TxDOT during these public meetings is to deck over I-30 in front of Arlington Heights High School, which would kind of restore the grand lawn that used to exist there and reconnect two neighborhoods that have been separated by highway construction of the past. We also did a plan for Polytechnic Heights with that community and UTA students. And back to the project that you might have been struggling through the last year or so, University Drive, the addition of the medians in University Drive through the shopping area. That's phase one, was a concept plan that community design came up with students at UTA, submitted to the city. I was on the council at the time, so was able to get that on a bond and get that funded. And so I apologize for the construction, but there's always pinch points when we are improving things. And hopefully we might have to wait a little bit for the landscaping that's going to go in some of the larger medians because it's so hot right now. We don't want to put it in and have it all die. But phase two is going to start, so put your patient pants on and get ready for the phase that's going to improve the area between Trinity Park and the Botanic Gardens. Because if you've ever tried to make a left into the Botanic Gardens, that's going to be better. And there will also be connections via the bus stops and more robust crosswalks and that sort of thing. So before I open it up for questions, I did want to end with one inspirational thing that I wrote down so that I wouldn't mess it up. Get to the end of my notes. And that is that I want to leave you with a main takeaway. And that takeaway is that creating a pattern is important. A pattern is like a plan. And because that drives what our community will be. We are at a pivotal moment here in Fort Worth, and we are looking back. We can see the patterns that developed, maybe some of them not so intentionally. But if we are intentional and include everyone, we can create future patterns that will be more true to what Jane Jacobs says, that cities have the capability of providing something for everybody only because and only when they are created by